Story 1. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. It was late October when James found himself driving down the lonely stretch of Route 47, a two-lane highway notorious for its twists, turns, and sparse traffic. A torrential downpour had reduced visibility to almost nothing, making the journey even more treacherous. The rain drummed against the roof of his car, and every now and then, his windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the deluge. James had been visiting his parents in the next town over, and was now hurrying back to his apartment. He had heard rumors about this road, stories of mysterious accidents, ghostly sightings, and strange figures appearing by the roadside. But James wasn't one to believe in urban legends. To him, the dark road was just that, a road. As the rain blurred the edges of his vision, James thought he saw a figure standing on the side of the road ahead. Squinting, he leaned forward, gripping the steering wheel. Sure enough, there was someone there. A young woman, drenched to the bone, wearing an old-fashioned white dress. Her hair clung to her face and she stood perfectly still, her arm raised with her thumb pointing upward. "A hitchhiker? In this weather?" James muttered. Against his better judgment, he slowed the car and pulled over, rolling down the window slightly. "Are you all right?" he called out, but the woman didn't respond. She simply stood there, gazing at him with a distant, glassy stare. After a moment's hesitation, James opened the passenger door. "Hop in," he said, his voice more uneasy than he intended. "I'll give you a ride." Without a word, the woman climbed into the car. The air in the vehicle grew colder, and James felt an inexplicable chill crawl down his spine. The drive resumed in silence. James stole glances at his passenger, noticing how she stared blankly ahead, water dripping from her soaked dress onto the seat. He tried to make small talk, but she didn't respond, her eyes fixed on some unseen point in the distance. Minutes passed, and James felt a growing sense of dread. Something was wrong. The woman's presence felt unnatural. He decided to drop her off at the nearest gas station, but as he glanced at her once more, his heart skipped a beat. Her seat was empty. Panicked, James slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop on the slick road. He turned in his seat, scanning the back and the surrounding area, but there was no trace of the woman. His heart raced as he realized what had just happened. He had heard the story before, the legend of the vanishing hitchhiker, a ghost who appeared on rainy nights along Route 47. But he had never believed it, until now. Story 2. The Man in the Rearview Mirror. Lena had always loved driving through the countryside, even on stormy nights like this one. There was something peaceful about the rain tapping against the windows and the empty roads stretching out before her. But this particular night felt different. The darkness seemed deeper and the rain heavier, as if the world itself was trying to hide something. Her headlights illuminated the winding road ahead, casting long shadows from the trees that lined the route. Every so often, a flash of lightning lit up the sky, briefly revealing the eerie shapes of the landscape. It was during one of these flashes that Lena saw it, a man standing in the middle of the road. She gasped, swerving to avoid him, her tires skidding on the wet asphalt. Heart pounding, she came to a stop, breathing heavily. She looked in her rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man standing behind her car. But the road was empty. Shaken, Lena took a deep breath and glanced back once more, trying to convince herself that it had just been her imagination. She turned back to the wheel, ready to continue, when something caught her eye. In the rearview mirror, a figure slowly emerged, a man sitting in the back seat, staring directly at her. Lena's blood ran cold. She hadn't picked anyone up. She hadn't stopped for a passenger. Her hands trembled on the wheel, and she could feel his gaze piercing the back of her head. Her mind raced. What should she do? Was he real? Was this some kind of hallucination? The figure remained still, his face obscured by shadows, but she could sense his presence, feel the weight of his eyes on her. Lena tried to calm herself, glancing from the road to the mirror, desperately hoping the man would vanish, just as he had appeared, but he didn't. In a burst of panic, Lena floored the gas pedal, speeding down the road as fast as she could. Her heart raced in time with the pounding rain, and her knuckles turned white as she gripped the steering wheel. She refused to look in the mirror, too terrified of what she might see. After what felt like an eternity, Lena reached the outskirts of town. Her car screeched to a halt in front of the nearest gas station. She scrambled out, not daring to look back. She bolted into the station, her breath ragged, her entire body shaking. The attendant behind the counter gave her a concerned look. "Are you okay?" he asked. Lena didn't answer right away, her eyes darting to the car. There was someone in the back seat," she stammered. The attendant stepped outside to check, but after a quick inspection, he shook his head. "There's no one there," he said. But Lena knew what she had seen, or who, and from that day forward, she never drove alone on rainy nights again. Story 3. The Crying Child. Chris had always been a practical, no-nonsense kind of guy. He didn't believe in ghosts, demons, or any of that paranormal nonsense. But that changed one fateful night as he drove home through the pouring rain. He had taken a shortcut through the old wooded road, a path less traveled, but significantly quicker. The road was narrow, with towering trees on either side, their branches swaying menacingly in the wind. The rain was relentless, hammering down on his car, and the fog that clung to the ground only made the drive more unnerving. As Chris navigated the winding road, his headlights barely cutting through the thick mist, he heard something strange. A faint sound, like a child crying. He brushed it off at first, thinking it must be the wind playing tricks on him. But as he continued, the crying grew louder. It wasn't coming from outside the car. It was inside. Chris's heart began to race. He glanced at the back seat, but there was no one there. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to focus on the road, but the crying persisted. It was unmistakable now. The voice of a young child, sobbing softly as if lost or frightened. "Who's there?" Chris called out, his voice shaky. There was no response, only the pitiful sound of crying. His mind raced. Was he hallucinating? He hadn't slept well in days, but this was too real, too vivid to be a figment of his imagination. Unable to take it any longer, Chris pulled over to the side of the road. The crying had stopped. For a moment, he sat there in silence, listening to the rain beating against the roof of the car, trying to steady his breathing. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something. A small figure standing just outside the passenger window. A child, drenched from head to toe, stood there, staring at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. Chris froze, his blood turning to ice. The child's mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came out. Then, slowly, the figure faded, dissolving into the mist like a wisp of smoke. Chris sat there, paralyzed with fear, unable to comprehend what he had just witnessed. After what felt like an eternity, he forced himself to move, slamming the car into gear and speeding away from the spot. The crying never returned, but the memory of that ghostly child haunted Chris for years. No matter how hard he tried, he could never shake the feeling that someone, was still out there on that desolate road, waiting for another traveler to find them on a rainy night. The end. Each of these stories serves as a reminder that even the most ordinary of situations, a rainy night drive, can take a chilling turn when the unknown lurks in the darkness. Whether it's a hitchhiker who vanishes without a trace, a mysterious figure in your rearview mirror, or the cries of a lost child, the road can be a place where the supernatural and the real world collide.